Bitcoin Treasury companies are all the rage in 2025. Over 150 public companies now hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. In this video, I'm going to simply break down the three primary reasons why this phenomenon has occurred. And if you stay tuned to the end of this video, I will equip you with the information you need to make your own personal analysis and determine whether you should buy Bitcoin directly or invest in one of these treasury companies. And if so, which treasury companies should you invest in? Let's get into it. The first reason Bitcoin treasury companies exist is quite simple. Companies need Bitcoin too. Individuals use Bitcoin to preserve the value of their work across time. Companies, when they produce value, whether they're big or small or medium size, they need something that they can store their value in as well, because fiat currency doesn't work. Even the best fiat currencies like the dollar lose roughly 7% of their value per year. And if you're a business and you're contributing value, producing value for the world, what can you store that value in so it will retain its energy across time? Well, you can't use the dollar. Perhaps you could reinvest into the business. Perhaps you could buy land or gold or fine art. This is the question that Michael Saylor was asking himself 5 years ago when he made Strategy the very first Bitcoin Treasury company. And the answer he found was Bitcoin. This is the best thing to put your retained earnings into so that it will maintain its value and its purchasing power across time and space. So whether you are a business intelligence software company like Strategy, a small discount hotel company like MetaPlanet, or a medical research company like Semler Scientific, it doesn't matter what your business is. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. Companies need Bitcoin too. They need to preserve the value that they produce for society, and fiat currency is incapable of doing that. Another point on this is that you're likely going to see arguably, quote unquote, less successful companies adopt Bitcoin as a balance sheet reserve asset before you see some of the big names like Apple and Amazon and Microsoft doing so. The reason is because if you are a less successful company, you kind of need Bitcoin more. Now, of course, Apple and Amazon and Facebook and all of these tech giants, they produce a lot of value. They have a lot of value to save. But on the other hand, investors are already treating their equities as a sort of savings account. So the Mag 7 is responsible for most of the gains in the S&P 500 every year. The stock of these companies goes up a decent bit. It outperforms the S&P 500. And so if you're one of these companies, you're comparing your return on capital to saving in cash or T-bills or investing into the S&P 500, or you can just buy back your stock. And that's going to do a pretty decent job at retaining its value. Granted, it's not going to outperform Bitcoin, but when your core business is so successful, you don't necessarily want to detract from your mainline business and become more focused on Bitcoin versus, if your Strategy or MetaPlanet or any other company that is doing okay but not great, your growth prospects are low, you're better off just buying Bitcoin because that capital will grow at a faster rate than simply reinvesting into the company, which the hurdle rate is much lower if you're a less successful business versus if you're Apple or Amazon. Now, you may make a personal trade-off to withdraw capital from a retirement account, take the tax penalty so that you can buy Bitcoin directly and put it into cold storage. That's a fine trade-off to make, but understand that many people in this world are not willing to make that trade-off. And so Bitcoin treasury companies provide a way for this trapped capital to gain incremental exposure to Bitcoin. Not only that, but many of the funds in this world have legal restrictions as to what they can buy. Some of them can't even buy the Bitcoin ETF. They have to invest in equities directly or preferred equities or debt instruments. So Bitcoin treasury companies are serving this market far more than they are catering towards retail investors, and that's okay. These markets are filled with capital, and for Bitcoin to get to $1 million per coin, we are going to have to create products that serve these markets. The third reason that Bitcoin treasury companies exist is because of oil refineries. Now, this is a framework that Saylor has popularized when it comes to his own Bitcoin treasury company, Strategy. He has compared them to an oil refinery because what an oil refinery does is they take crude oil, jet fuel, gasoline, petroleum, all sorts of different goods and services that derive from the crude oil, the raw material, the resource, the commodity. Bitcoin is a commodity too. It is a monetary commodity. And the purchasing power of Bitcoin is volatile because it is being adopted as a monetary commodity. Now, many investors, myself included, are okay with Bitcoin's volatility. I can purchase Bitcoin and I can stomach a 75% drawdown. I crave volatility. But on the other hand, most of the world is not okay with that volatility. And so they want access to Bitcoin's explosive upside potential, but they want to limit the downside volatility. And so, just like an oil refinery takes this raw commodity and creates different products, Strategy and other Bitcoin treasury companies take Bitcoin, the raw commodity, and make different products. So, for example, they have Strike, their preferred equity. It has Bitcoin exposure to the upside by nature of the perpetual convertibility into strategy stock, but it has downside protection because of its dividend and because of its seniority within the strategy ecosystem. Now, that volatility that is taken away from Strike is then delivered to strategy shareholders. And so they are a Bitcoin refinery of all sorts of different products. But what about all of these other Bitcoin treasury companies? How many can exist? Well, I think at the minimum, you can have a strategy in every single market. Strategy serves the United States, which is the largest, most important pool of capital in the world. But there are hundreds of other nations out there, and there are plenty of capital markets to be served. Investors want diversified exposure. They want these strategy preferred debt type products, but they want a basket with dozens or hundreds of different types of these instruments to create a diversified exposure to the underlying commodity, which is Bitcoin. Moreover, there are plenty of ways for companies, even competing in the same market, a strategy to differentiate themselves. You can accumulate Bitcoin by mining instead of buying it directly. You can have different tendencies as it pertains to equity dilution, accretive dilution, and how you issue shares into the market. You can be of a different size and have higher growth potential. There are no shortage of different possibilities and different ways you can interact with the underlying commodity to create different products that serve these financial markets. So I hope that sheds some light into the need for these companies. And the most important thing to understand is that Bitcoin treasury companies are not competing against Bitcoin. It's not, do I buy Bitcoin or do I buy a treasury company? The market that Bitcoin treasury companies are serving are not capable legally or logistically of buying Bitcoin directly and holding it in self-custody. It's Bitcoin Treasury Company or S&P 500. It's Bitcoin Treasury Company or Treasury bonds. It's Bitcoin or a stock buyback. So I wholly encourage everyone to buy Bitcoin and keep it in self-custody. It gives you sovereign control over your wealth in a way that no other asset does. It is risk-free in the sense that Bitcoin, when you hold it yourself, there are no counterparties. No other asset like that exists. It has an absolutely finite supply. It's a big deal. And obviously, this goes without saying, these properties of Bitcoin are why Bitcoin treasury companies have been so successful. They're built on the best asset of all time. But there is definitely value to be found in the Bitcoin treasury company world. And these companies are the vehicle through which Bitcoin takes capital from traditional markets, stocks, bonds, and real estate.